We're going to be talking about a question that I received from a fellow subscriber about what sight reading books I recommend to beginners. It's kind of a multifaceted question because there's a lot that goes into that question. First of all, what kind of beginner are you? Do you understand the basics of note identification, rhythms? Do you understand how to move your fingers? It's a matter of what level are you at. So I'm going to try to decipher this question the best way I can by sharing a little bit about my backstory. I was a pianist since I was 8, and so I've taken piano lessons for a long time. And I remember I used to master certain pieces with my teacher, and they were a little bit more advanced than the ability I had to actually sight read. And I always remember feeling disappointed that I could play really cool pieces, but then whenever someone asked me, can you play this or this and this? And I said, no, probably give me maybe 2 weeks to figure it out. So what I decided one day was I would pull out one of my method books. And one day I decided, okay, I'm tired of telling people that I don't understand how to really read music fast. So I decided I'm going to start from ground zero with John Thompson, Teaching Little Fingers to Play. This was the first book that I started out, and to prove it, there's my teacher, Ginny Abbott's. I only had her for like a year, but there's 2010, so I was born in '02. I just took out this book and I said, okay, I'm going to read through this whole thing and see if anything trips me up. And whenever something did, I'd go on Google and figure it out. But the main thing I realized when I was going through my method books was that everything was in an organized fashion. So first, when you start at ground zero, this was just a very basic book. The first page started out with 3 quarter notes. And it was, let me see. Yeah, so the first couple of notes were just C, D, E, C, D, E, D, C, D, E, C, C. And it was just quarter notes and half notes. Then the next page was just the bass clef, and it was the same thing, but instead of C, D, E, it was C, B, A. And it just went down the keyboard. The next page, it did both of those things together. So it progressively got a little bit more challenging. So it was C, D, E, and then A, B, C, and then it had both hands alternating. And then it introduced more complicated rhythms. Once I was good with quarters and half notes, it started to introduce what? The dotted half note right here. And it had it right on this first line. And so the more I went through these method books, it was almost like I was going through a refresher course, because maybe you're like me, maybe you have mastered a couple of pieces, but whenever someone asks you, can you play this or that, you always say no. So maybe you just need a refresher. You probably do know how to read notes, and you probably do have a general understanding of how rhythms work. Maybe you don't have it completely solidified, but if you go through some of these method books, it'll completely answer some of those questions, because a lot of it progressively gets harder is what it does. And so by the end of the book, when I was doing it by myself, do it without a teacher. That way you really depend on you get an honest view of where your sight reading is at. Because if you do sight reading with your teacher, you might say, oh, let me get your help, and then you'll never know where exactly you are. So it's really important to really examine where you are in your sight reading journey. And by the end of the method book, those 3 quarter notes, C, D, E, turned into more advanced. So now we're playing 2 notes in the left hand and 1 note in the right hand. So it just progressively got harder. So I would really recommend John Thompson, the first one. And then I'd recommend, of course, Teaching Little Fingers to Play More. So this is the second book. And then he goes through the first grade. This is a very old edition. So usually I would say, okay, just go on through the John Thompson series, right? Well, actually, I don't really like the second grade of John Thompson. It's a little tricky. And I just didn't like it. So then I switched over to Faber, and Faber is really good. You can start at 3A after after the first grade. You're pretty equipped. Unless you want more practice, then you can do 2B, okay? Just don't do primer or level 1. It's way too easy, okay? And these levels go all the way through. And the good thing about these Faber books is, you can't see that. So let's see. They have the lesson book, they have the performance book, and they have theory books. So a lot of these method books, they have these levels in unison. So you can study technique alongside your sight reading, alongside your whatever. And you can even have performance pieces. And you can choose from wide amounts of repertoire to sight read from. And they're all within the same level. Another pro tip for sight reading. I remember when I first entered college for my music performance degree, I was in a theory class, and every time we did an analysis on the piece, we would listen to the piece with the score in front of us on the projector. And so the whole class would listen to the piece, and we'd all be following along with the score on the projector. And so sometimes the teacher would stop and say, "Where are we?" And so you would have to wake up and say, oh, we're right there. So that's another great thing that you can do, is just figuring out where exactly you are in the score, listening all the time. Listen to music with the score in hand. So that way you can hear how certain rhythms actually play out. Maybe you're not very good at understanding how these rhythms sound, and you don't have that internal beat just yet. So the more music you listen to with the score, you can see how those relationships play out. So that's another pro tip. Take a look at some scores, like I said earlier. So let's say you're a little bit more advanced, right? And you want to sight read a Beethoven sonata all from scratch. Well, it probably wouldn't hurt to just look at the Beethoven 32 piano sonatas and just see what they sound like. Can you pinpoint where he stopped? Yes, I can, because it's right here and I see a big fermata there. So by listening and being able to point, oh, this is where we are. I see he played those a little bit different. Those were staccato notes. Now let's say I have no idea where he is right now. Well, I'm gonna listen for these eighth notes because they're gonna be really fast, and it's gonna be ba-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da with the left hand. There it is. A scale passage. Scale. I'm gonna listen for a big chord here with a fortissimo to a piano. And by listening and seeing the score in real time, it'll inform your sight reading a little bit more, because sometimes you can go into sight reading a little blind, right? Because maybe you don't know all these things. Maybe you don't know what this P is and what this double F is. That's a fortissimo. And what's SF? Sforzando. I can never say that word. But just seeing how all of these things, if you want to become a better sight reader, you need to know what the performance practice is. So that's another pro tip. Something else you want to do when you're sight reading is understand everything you can about the piece. Let's say you picked out a random piece. You don't have one of these fancy dancy method books, but I don't know, maybe you're sight reading something from Vince Guaraldi. I don't know why you would do that. Since it's fall and I want to do some sight reading from Vince Guaraldi, I'm gonna look at The Great Pumpkin Waltz. And the first thing I look at is the time signature and the key signature. I look for any rhythms that might trip me up. I look for, where do my hands go in the first place? It looks like they go on a C minor chord. If you can read these chord symbols, that's another great thing. So let's say your note identification isn't really fast enough. Well, if they have the chord symbol right on top, you're gonna be guaranteed that you know the first three notes, but you probably don't know what order they're in if you're not quick enough. So I know that these first three notes are gonna be C, E flat, and G, because it's a C minor 7 with a B flat. It's important to know some music theory in advance. Music theory, note identification, and rhythm. So I'm going to go on the computer and show you how you can actually look at some of these things on YouTube. Sometimes all you need is YouTube. I just looked up some clapping rhythms, so let's look. So you can look at drumming rhythms. That will really help. So I love this one. It's called Sight Read Drums. He's the best in my opinion. These are the quarters, and this is level 1. These are quarters and eighth notes. This is level 2. Level 3 gets 16th notes. Ti, ti, ta, ta, tiga, 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 ta, tiga, tiga, ta. I remember this was a very humbling experience for me when I realized that I could play these pro pieces, but I couldn't sight read baby pieces. And it was a humbling experience to go to something like this at like 14, 15 years old. But it doesn't matter how old you are. Nobody is too old for, I don't know, what does this say right here? Easy piano sheet music for kids. It doesn't matter what the title of the book is. If you can't do what's inside, then you are a kid at heart in the piano world. So don't let it disturb you when it says 4 or 5-year-olds, because you might just be, but in time you won't be anymore. So I hope you can take away something from this video, and please leave a comment down below what you thought, how you're going to implement some of these things. Maybe you're going to try out a method book, or maybe you're just going to try out maybe just hands separately for right now, or you're going to start listening more. I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Like and subscribe, and thanks so much for tuning in once again.